So what are we looking at here? Money, right? We all like money. This is a $10 bill, 10 bucks. Now, what about the face? Who is on this money? Did you ever notice the face? Well, his name is Alexander Hamilton. It's a name you're going to hear a lot this term and a lot during this lecture. He is the topic of today's lecture. Now, you can guess, I'm sure, that Hamilton was important in history. There must be a reason he's on the money after all, right? So today, I want to explain a little something about the world Hamilton lived in and the way he shaped it. How he changed that world. I'm going to start with some background, U.S. history in Hamilton's time. I'm going to give some facts about his life, and finally tell you about why people today are still talking about him. First of all, a question for you. How old is your country, your home country? When did it start? Is there an exact date, an exact year? Now, many people will say, my country has always been here. It's very old, but our modern government started such and such a year. The U.S. is different. The U.S. is not an old country. The history goes back just a few hundred years. It's a young country. First, you might know that starting around the year 1600, people came from different European countries and settled down on the east coast of what's today America. Europeans came from Spain, and they settled in the south, in Florida. The French went to the north, what's today called Canada. And in between, near today's Washington, D.C., lots of English people settled. Now, that was hard. It's a hard life, and many of the original settlers died. But over the next 150 years, they built up towns, cities, colleges, roads, farms. They built their own culture. They built their own strong economy. Now, at the time, they were colonies of England. That means their ruler, their political leader, was King George III. You write it like this. And they had to pay taxes to England. But this relationship between the colonies and King George, it wasn't very good. The colonies, by the year 1750, they were doing really well. There were around 1 million people living in 13 different colonies. And by this time, they had their own culture. They had a strong economy, as we've heard. And they decided, well, we don't want to pay taxes to England. We want to be independent. We want to be free. So they told the king, we are going to leave England. We're going to be an independent country. Did that in 1776. There was then a war, the Revolutionary War, which went on for about 6 years. The colonies won, you could probably guess that, in 1781. They created a totally new government. It was a democracy. People could vote. People could choose their leaders. There were no more kings. And they created everything a modern country needs. The rules for society, for businesses, for banks, for military, for the relationships, international relationships with other countries. It was all new. Now that was a very exciting time. And this is where Alexander Hamilton becomes even more important. Hamilton was born in the Caribbean. Maybe you know some of these islands. His island, St. Croix, was very poor, and he was born to an unmarried woman. In those days, that really meant that he had no future, no chance of education, no good job. But Hamilton was special. He taught himself about politics, economics, and literature. He was a brilliant writer, and he was recognized for that. In 1772, people sent him away from that small island and to New York, where there were colleges. There were Harvard, Princeton, Columbia, the same ones world famous today. His goal was to get educated and to do something great with his life. And he was ambitious, very ambitious and driven. He was in college when the war for independence was about to start. He participated in that war and he made a name for himself. Eventually, he became the most trusted assistant to George Washington, the first president of the new United States of America. Hamilton was part of the very first government, and he wrote many of the rules and the philosophy that shape our government and military and economy today, right now. He created the first national bank and the U.S. Mint, which prints currency, money, coins. Now, that's a lot, right? You can see why he's on our money today. Hamilton was part of a very small club, the men, and they were all men, called the Founding Fathers. In other words, they founded the country. So this is a remarkable career. It's an amazing life. And his life ended in a shocking way when he was shot to death in a duel, in a gunfight by one of his old friends, who was also an old enemy, and actually the Vice President of the United States. But that is a story for another day. For now, let's do a quick recap of the major points you'll really need to remember. First, some American history. You'll want to remember when the English started their colonies on the east coast of the U.S., how long it took those colonies to develop and want to become independent. Remember when the U.S. declared independence and when the Revolutionary War began and ended. Remember when Hamilton arrived in the U.S. and all the things that he did. This picture, this story, is the background of the musical we'll be listening to all term. This brings me to my last point, a quick one. The musical play Hamilton. We're going to be listening to songs from this musical this term to help meet our pronunciation goals. The musical tells the story of Hamilton's life, and he had an amazing life, which we saw even in this brief little look at it. The musical goes into all the details. His birth, his friends, his time fighting in the war with Washington, his role in the government, his family, his loves, his losses, and his amazing death. Murdered by his old friend, the Vice President of the United States. The musical tells his whole story. Now, I started this lecture with a question, and I'm going to end it with a question. You know something about Hamilton, right? Alexander Hamilton. You know something about his time in history. And you know that there is a play, a musical, called Hamilton that's about him, tells his life story. Now, my last question is, what can you find out about the musical Hamilton? Is it popular? Who is in it? Who sees it? Can you watch it? Can you see it on YouTube? Can you see it on Netflix? Who sings it? Who knows about it? Is it famous? This is an open-ended question. I want you to spend not too long, just about 10 minutes, maybe 15 minutes, go on Google, search around, see what you can find out to answer these questions. Use the handout in the workbook or this handout that your teacher gives you. Be ready to share a fact or two about Hamilton next time in class. All right, that's all we have for today. Thank you. Good luck.